Hey everybody, it is Scott Schnars. I am here with my good friend Adon Gottlieb for another episode of Lunch Money with Scott and Adon. And I got to ask, if you like this, you get value from these, would love it if you liked and subscribe to this channel. Today we are starting with what I think is going to be a really contentious topic. I think that Adon's a little bit more pragmatic than I am, but the contention topic is this. I think that BANT as a qualifying mechanism for salespeople is terrible and it should be thrown away. I think that every company out there should replace BANT as their qualifier with something like MEDDPICC, which is a lot more thorough in terms of how an organization does their evaluation and does their qualification of opportunities. Like I said, Adon is a little bit more pragmatic than I am. I think he believes that BANT isn't bad. It just needs to be updated. But when we were preparing for this episode, this turned into a discussion of whether we're qualifying leads or we're qualifying opportunities. People just throw out the word qualification very haphazardly or very just kind of nonchalantly, but without any definition of it. So with that opening of my kind of anti-BANT stance, my anti-BANT stance, I want to flip it over to Adon, who thinks like, no, BANT is okay, and it probably just needs to be updated because it is really a kind of a 30-year-old methodology that's built around inbound leads that were coming in as an easy way to qualify. And before I flip it over to Adon, if you're not familiar with BANT, you can go out and Google that, but BANT stands for Budget, Authority, Need, and Timing, which is kind of the four things that an organization often needs in order to qualify a lead or an opportunity. Adon, counterpoint.
Well, first, I want to point out that you're being way too kind to how the conversation really went. I think it was more yelling and screaming when Scott comes in and says, this sucks, and we need to throw away BANT and MEDDPICC should rule the world, which I must say, I do agree with the first part of the statement. I think BANT in its current construct, I wouldn't use the word suck, but it sucks. It doesn't work really well. It has a lot of problems. And I think that's part of the problem. And to Scott's point, I think the conversation as it evolved was I took the position of like, hey, before you throw it away, which again is a viable thing to think about doing it, I think you have to address two things. One is kind of what the origin of BANT was created for a reason, and for probably a good reason. So we need to make sure we have something to replace it with. And the second is the context of it. And I think this is what Scott just touched on, which is really, really important. When you do BANT, which is basically qualification criteria for how do we qualify an opportunity or a lead, you have to be very clear. What are you qualifying? And I think the first point of failure is BANT is really a qualification for leads, not for opportunities.
I think that's an important distinction too.
Yeah, and I think you'll ask most people and ask them, what are you qualifying? And you're going to get mixed results. And I could even talk about us and working together and me working in other companies. Sometimes it even changes. Sometimes we call it leads, sometimes we call it opportunities. It all started with this MQL and SQL, which are sales qualified leads and marketing qualified opportunity, marketing qualified leads. So it was all lead oriented. And an opportunity is not necessarily a lead. So I think that's an important distinction of when you use BANT. Both cases, by the way, the choice that you're making or the decision you're making is, am I going to invest more into that specific situation, right? Because it requires further investment. I think opportunity represents a larger investment than a qualified lead investment. Qualified lead investment would be, oh, I'll take the call and have a conversation there. Qualified opportunity means I'm going to put the SEs on it. I'm going to start a whole campaign. So there's a lot more investment in opportunity. So first point is important. Make the distinction between qualifying lead and qualifying opportunities. And I will jump to the end. I would say, I think my opinion is you can still use a new version of BANT on qualifying leads. When you look at qualifying opportunity, you should probably look at something different. And maybe we need to do a different episode about how do you qualify an opportunity, because there's a lot of different things there that needs to come into play. So we agree on current BANT doesn't work well. I think you got to be a little bit more specific about where to use BANT going forward. And then I can talk about my second point on what's kind of the new BANT. But before that, maybe we'll touch on, because I mentioned it was created for a reason, right?
Yeah. Yeah, back when
So
people didn't have information, right? The information was scarce when BANT was invented. Imagine that.
So what do you think it was created for?
Man, from my understanding, and this is like I'm putting the Wayback Machine on to when I first started selling back in the early 80s, and we used Band, but what we got was a tremendous number of inbound leads. And it was really just, the first question was, hey, do you have any money to buy this? Really. And that's part of why I don't like Bant is because, I think that oftentimes it gets used for outbound as an outbound criteria. And if I called you up today and I'm like, hey, Don, I've got this amazing alien technology. I'd love to sell it to you. Do you have any money? Your response to that is just going to be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what you do. I don't know why I would have any money for you. And you hang up the phone. So I think starting with that is a bad, just starting by asking somebody if they have any money is a bad box to start with if that's your first criteria. And I know that like a few years ago, maybe a decade ago now, somebody came up with ANUM, which is authority, need, urgency money, which I like more because it puts the money on the back end and puts the importance of, am I talking to the right person and do they actually need what I'm selling here on the front end? But I don't feel like it captures the key qualitative elements like pain points, the decision process, the influence of internal champions. And it's so inflexible that you, as a seller and as a sales leader, I think you're leaving a lot of opportunities on the table if BANT is your opportunity criteria model. Great
I think
tool
you're right.
back in 30, 40 years ago when it came out. I'm sure it was awesome.
It's important point and distinction that, Bent is mainly a tool for inbound. So we get to the end and summarize the stuff about, okay, if you want to use a more modern Bent, use it for leads, not opportunities, and use it for inbound, not for outbound. Although if you really look back, it was created to try and create something very simplified, single kind of method that you can go and figure out, is this, the problem with that happening is that the world has changed in terms of the complexity of selling and how people get educated about it and where they get and where they show up. And so it was too simple for that. It became very transactional. So if you're a transactional kind of piece, it's like you drove it for the transaction. And it became this mechanism for either blaming other groups or covering your ass kind of thing. So it became more of a supporting the bureaucracy of the company versus being a valuable part. And I think this is where you come in and say, hey, Bent sucks kind of thing. And that's the part that I kind of agree with you. And so
for sure, everything.
Well, on that part, not the whole thing, but if we go and we talk about, so now we got that, more focus, right? We're talking about qualifying leads, opportunities, and mostly in an inbound kind of concept. And I want to suggest for you to think about this, maybe a more modern or updated view of Bent, if this is something that's getting used in kind of that context, right? Let's go one by what each of them are and kind of where it's at, and tell me if it resonates or you want to throw it away.
Okay.
I will preface another thing. I don't think, Bent, it's another good point, that the order of things shouldn't be that order. It doesn't have to be, budget, authority, need, time, in that order of how would I uncover it. It should
you disagree with the rigidity of BANT?
Yes. These are the 4 things you want to have in place before you say, this lead is worthwhile spending more time on.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be in that order. Like, all right, let's start with step 1. I first need to verify this. So let's talk about kind of the old versus the new. So budget, let's start with budget, right? The old word was like, is there money allocated for this initiative? Right, that's what it was. And I think the modern
because
was
you got
more
an
like,
inbound lead.
Yes. It's like, hey, you here? You got money for this, or should I spend time with you? Again, the discussion is like, do I spend more time? I think the modern world is more about where the money is going to be allocated from if something happens here. Where would it come from, really? Because you have assumptions here with budgets. You have an assumption that the budget is transparent, either to the guy who you're talking to, or even that they're going to share it with you. And that assumption might not be right, especially in an environment where you sell to multiple individuals. So you're going to move from, do you have money allocated to this, to like, okay, if you guys going to buy something like this, where would the budget come from? As long as I can identify where is it coming from, and then I got the budget part covered in kind of the new Bent. I got I understand where the money is going to come from, which is the purpose here of budget. We talk about authority. The old authority was like, are you the decision maker? Again, the underlying assumption is like a single decision maker is making that decision. And it wasn't the case in many places, but definitely not the case anymore. And so you need to figure out on their side 1 or 2 things, right? Are they part of that decision-making process somehow so they can put you in? Or do they give you insight of what the process is so you can understand what the process is? So one of these 2 will give you, okay, now I understand the authority structure of how these things are going to be made and how the decision is going to work. So moving from like, oh, are you the guy? There's no longer a single guy, to are you part of the group, or what's the group, or how the process should look like? And then you're like, now I got kind of the authority mapped out, or I have a way to get to the authority. I'm part of the authority. When you go to need, right? The old world was confirm the need, right? They have to say, oh, I have this. I hereby sign and admit that I have these problems I'm going to go fix. I think today's world is really identifying more of what really are their pain points, or sometimes even do they experience the symptoms that tells you that they get to that kind of a problem. You don't need to you don't need to have them admit or sign or swear that they have that kind of a problem. So again, the notion was like, understand there is a need instead of confirming. Just you can even go softer into, is the pain there? Are the symptoms for the pain there? Is it enough for me to say if I connect the dots? Because you know what, guys, remember, selling needs to still happen. This is not order taking, right? If it's an order taking motions, then fine, it doesn't matter. You don't need salespeople, you need order takers, that's great. But if you need selling, it's not all going to be there. So you need to really figure that out. I think the last one is the timeline, right? Or timing, which in the old world was like, when is it going to happen? Or when are you going to buy? Versus what is the timeline for a change? Like, what will the process look like? And, is this going to happen in the next 60 years, 40 years, 10 months? And you really want to have something within the answer here to be qualified would be something in a reasonable time frame. And I would even argue that if the answer is more than 12 months, probably not a good qualified place. Even if you're selling something big that takes years to sell, the cycles in today's markets don't allow for multi-year selling anymore. If you are, then you really are at the conceptual stage. You're not really in an opportunity. But again, we're qualifying leads here. So.
Yeah.
So that's the deal. Yeah.
As you're talking, I had a bit of an epiphany. Last week we talked about car dealerships doing demos, right? They have to do a test drive.
Yep.
Right. This almost harkens back to like the way that car dealerships treated customers back in the 70s and 80s, and maybe even before that. Was like, as soon as you walked into the dealership, if you wanted to do a test drive, they would take a credit report from you, even before like you were allowed to even think about it, because they wanted to see, do you have the budget? And they were always sexist and went, oh, hey, do you have your, Mrs. Gottlieb, is your husband here with you too that can sign off on this? And like looking for that authority. And then, I don't think the car dealerships necessarily care about the need that much, but the timing, like, what do I have to do to get you in this car today, was like a really critical one.
Yeah. And you could see it was across all industries that people adopted that kind of emotion. And even in car, purchasing, it's interesting because it's no longer a single decision anymore. You talked about even the difference between, who makes the decision, me or my wife. It's clear, it's my wife's. But it's a joint decision. No longer there's one side that just done that like in the past. Yeah. So I think that's kind of that new world that you have to look at. There's one missing piece though.
Yeah, talk about that.
This whole ban thing. And in this new world, people are behaving different. You miss the context of doing these things. Because I can go and I can immediately qualify a ban right now and say, oh, we have friends of ours who have a small store that they sell cupcakes. And so if I go reach out to her right now, she's got the money allocated because she wants to buy this software that will make her her website significantly better and faster. She is the decision maker and the only decision maker. She has the need because she wants the website to bring in more people and more traffic, and she would do it right now. But that has no match to something who's selling an enterprise B2B platform to try and manage his websites for high e-commerce kind of companies. A complete mismatch because there's no context. So the band itself could be very misleading if you don't have the context. And I think that's the other part that is missing. Again, more critical in today's world. You a little bit can say, if it was an inbound, you shouldn't have gotten my website. But again, in today's marketing world, and now you throw a wider net, you'll get more of those. So you need that extra, we're missing a letter at the beginning to add to that band.
Right.
To the modern one.
So what would you say that they have to be the target customer? Like that should be the first thing you should look at with that? Would you say that they have to be educated to do that? Like what is, there's like, this is like pre-band. So
yeah. So I think this is, the ICP is the play, but I think the ICP might be a little bit later down, again, the process where we're early on, we're talking about leads versus real opportunity. If it's an opportunity, it has to be the ICP. So I think something lighter. So maybe they have to be educated so maybe it's like It's E-band, something like this that we need to get to.
A Don band.
Yes, there we go.
There we go.
The
It's
Don
usually a
band.
Don band. All right. So I think like the takeaway then, as we're thinking about this, you know, I think that band sucks. And Don thinks it's okay, but I think that the key
No,
takeaway is like,
don't. I wouldn't agree with that. I think bent as it is sucks. I'm with you
yeah,
100%.
yeah. I think we're both aligned there.
Salvageable. It's applicable for certain things. You have to be very clear what you're using it for, and you have to use a modern version for it.
Yeah, and I think like
that would be
that's the
yeah.
piece. That's exactly right. And when qualifying opportunities, once that lead converts to an opportunity, then it's time to use something like MedPick, which is a much more detailed methodology. And when you and I first started talking about MedPick, half a dozen or so years ago, I think the way that you said it was, oh, this is a methodology that helps you. It acts as like mirrors for your car, right? It helps you see all of your blind spots so that you can understand what's missing in a particular deal there. But there is like, I do agree with you that in band, if you're going to use that, it does need to be modernized and maybe softened up a little bit so that it's not as rigid and is a little bit more encompassing to be able to qualify a lead. Now, in your modern way, like one of the things around lead qualification is it does need to be fairly like disciplined. Like, can you build that discipline with some of those softer answers to that? Like, and I like how you said about budget. Like, do you have budget? Well, I don't know yet. I need to go get it, but I have access to budget. And I think like that's a good soft way of doing it. If you're rolling this, E-band out to a new sales team, how soft do you let them be?
Well, I think part of the purpose, of the value of band or E-band now, I like the better,
Yeah, a Don band.
is to create that very well structured clarity process of what people need to do and how to progress that forward. So I think the definition might be a little bit softer what they are. The process should be very rigid as well. It's like, can you identify where the money will come from? It's very clear. Can you name the department or the person or where the budget is going to come from? So I don't think it means that we make it softer. We just change the definition of what the criteria is to make it sound, softer than show me the money, but tell me where the money is going to come from, kind of thing, at that early stage.
Yeah.
But I think the process has to be very, very rigid in order to be doing it. And also, don't forget, there's an enablement layer of they have to create, what are the conversations? How do I go and ask the budget question? Right? There's different methodologies to do it, and they're different than like, oh, do you got the money allocated? More towards questions like, if you guys are going to buy it, who's going to pay for it? Or is this a marketing initiative, or is it a sales initiative, or is it an engineering initiative? Or you could start building the conversations for your SDRs or your AEs, whoever is doing these first kind of discussions with the leads. And by the way, to your AI agent as well, if you have an AI agent that you're going to be using as the first point of contact, they need to have these, how do I do these discovery questions? And you have to think those through, but you have to introduce those questions to get to these answers, but you shouldn't be any softer. I don't know why I have software in my head. Any softer than the previous criteria is.
Man, not to derail from the conversation, but I got to use Bland last night, which is probably going to be the number one inbound AI SDR. It was awesome. It's such a good experience. And I think you're right. Like, can an AI qualify leads? It seems like it because they're doing it today.
Well, the one thing I'd say, if you really want to do, and because I played with a few of these things in the last year, one of the greatest things that I loved is that it really exposed your weaknesses. So if you have crappy questions of how to discover something,
great point,
then it would give you crappy kind of discovery or bad presentation. And you can't rely on AI to be able to do it like you threw it on. By the way, you shouldn't have relied on your SDRs or even your junior AEs to do it in the first place. But now you're going to get exposed. By the way, some of these tools are so great that they will tell you that, we use this thing, but we think it's a sucky kind of a way to go about it. So it's even nice that the AI tool tells you, I still did it, but it's not good.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right, so let's talk about that in a future episode. How do you best arrange AI to qualify leads for you?
Yeah, I think we need to do a follow-up on this. I think we need to do a follow-up on how do you qualify an opportunity, which is a very different practice done. Band does not qualify an opportunity.
Correct.
Band qualifies
especially an outbound
lead.
One.
Yes. And even in outbound, you could still use the fundamentals of this band thing on. And if I go to an outbound, I'm trying to create should I invest another conversation with this person, kind of, and bring in more people to that conversation? I can figure out, it's like, okay, I talked to him and I called you up. Hey, I got this new great widget. Did you be great for your company? And it's like, and again, this is where you don't want to do in order. It's like, I need to go for your symptoms. Like, you have these problems, you can't get your website to work, you can't get this. And it's like, oh yeah, it's not working for us. Okay. And would you love to do something about it? Oh, if we could do something, well, it'd be great. Good. If it'd be great this year or next? No, it'd be great if we could do something about it. Oh, good. And so if we do this thing, it's like, do you think marketing will pay? Usually marketing is paying for that. Who is paying for your side? And so you can just go even on an outbound and cover your e-band world, and maybe even your next step, because now we added the E at the beginning. You send them first to, like, here's some stuff, go watch it and let's get together. Or so you can
Great idea.
leverage these things so you could get the full e-band before you put in more resources. Again, qualifying a leader on opportunity just makes the decision if I'm going to invest more and more resources into that. Is it worth it? And is it worth it for both sides?
Great tactical idea there. E-band. So
yeah,
we'll have a little paper on this too.
Yeah, I think as a follow-up, we'll publish, and we want to do, and for those of you who survived until now in the episode, we want to start providing a little bit more value other than just a conversation. So we're going to do some follow-up blog posts and some tools and some frameworks that we're going to, templates that we're going to start publishing as a follow-up to these things. So expect kind of probably a blog post following up on that. What's the event and what the definitions are. And do continue sending us questions and comments, whether it's a direct message, or through LinkedIn or whatever you want to have the conversation. Bring it on. And whether you like it or hate it too, I mean, just bring it on. Look at Scott comes in and the conversation starts with like, Ben Stux, do you have anything to say about it, or are we done with the episode? So it's
could have been a 3-minute episode. Yeah. But I think we're aligned there, and I think that this was a great conversation.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a good and it's important thing that keeps hurting us along the way. And it's a complex sale. Nothing is easy. Even the straight transactional that people had in the past are no longer as simple as they were.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. All right, so that brings us to the end of this episode of Lunch Money with Scott and Adnan. Again, if you liked the video, please like and subscribe below, and looking forward to another one in a week. Thanks so much.
Bye, guys.